A little about me. By the way, great. It's great to be here. Looking forward to presenting my app to you. So, a little bit about me. I spent 18 years at Apple, the last 10 of which was as an executive. Um, I was in charge of engineering for a number of products, Aperture, iPhoto, Compressor, and other apps. So, that's mostly where I spent my time. Also, in charge of the group that does raw camera support for Apple. So I was a manager primarily, but I also designed and developed a lot of the applications. So I always was a technical contributor while also being in charge of the products. And I left, wow, that's a long time ago now. So we're coming up on 10 years that I've been gone. And then the year after I left, I started this little company to write my own apps. And I swore I would never write another photo app, and I wrote another photo app. So there you go. So the main apps I have are one's called Raw Power and the other one is called Nitro Photo. And today I'm focusing on the newer one, which is Nitro. Okay, so I like to say it's for every photographer and every photograph. It is, as I mentioned, a new app. It runs on both Mac OS and iOS and iPad OS, running on Ventura and iOS 16 and later. The basic idea is to provide powerful tools for editing and managing your photo library. So raw files, ProRAW, JPEG, HEIF, whatever. You can edit images, manage your images, and then along with some standard editing tools, there's masking, presets, cloning, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Apple named it one of its best new apps. It's been featured on the App Store. So, people have really responded well to this new product. And given that photo editing is such a crowded space, it's really nice that people started gravitating toward it. I like to say that Nitro lets you work the way you want to work. You can use the photo library if you like, and things like ratings and edits and smart albums, they will not only be visible, those changes will sync over iCloud. So I use photo albums in order to manage this. So when you make changes in Nitro, which is able to directly manipulate your photo library, those changes go into the photo library safely, and then they will sync over iCloud if you're using iCloud. A lot of people actually don't use Apple Photos for most of their images, or sometimes they don't use it for any of their images. Instead, they want to manage their photos directly using folders in the Finder. And so Nitro is very friendly about that too. So you can use the Finder or in the case of iOS, files.app, and you can do all the same stuff. You can rate and you can edit. It uses XMP sidecars rather than the photo library because there is no library in that case. You can actually use both at the same time as well. The other thing I like to say is you can shoot the way you want. So Apple's RAW engine, which I mentioned I used to be managing, adds support for hundreds of cameras. The problem recently is that Apple's support for cameras has gotten worse and worse and worse with time. Not that they've dropped cameras as much as they've just not adding new cameras. So people who are buying newer cameras are unable to actually get support in Photos or other applications that use Apple's RAW engine, which is apps like Darkroom and Photomator and stuff like that. What I have done is add support to Apple's decoder for a bunch of cameras and format. They work when you're using my apps. They don't work if you're using Darkroom or Photos. I'm able to augment Apple's decoder while you're using the app. So I was able to add newer cameras and also things like compressed Fujifilm images, GoPros, and the newer Nikon HE and HE Star format. So those are all now images you can actually edit in my applications, and you still get all the same Apple RAW tools that you get. So it's not like you have, this camera uses Apple's decoder, you get these controls, and if you're using another camera, then you get a different set of controls. I've unified everything. And on that note, Apple's decoder has a whole bunch of switches and knobs and things like that you can use to work on your images. And Nitro gives you the most control over the decoder. So partly that's because, I know a lot about it, but also because I think it's important to offer those tools for people because it allows you to make certain types of improvements you can make no other way. A little about raw. Now, again, I'll mention Nitro is not a raw only application. I mention it only because it's the best format for editing images. So if you're not aware, raw images capture sensor data. They're minimally processed. It's basically what the camera is seeing. They have inherently more dynamic range, which is the what's sometimes called bit depth. It's the number of basically individual values you can have for any given color. And there's more color options as well. So the color gamut, the range of colors themselves is greater, and there's finer differentiation between each color. You can also, for editing, can recover detail in overexposed areas. I will show that to you. You cannot do that in HEIFs and JPEGs. You can correct extreme white balance problems if you are a diver or shoot underwater. So in general, you can just do a lot more. There are advantages to JPEG and HEIF. I mean, they're smaller, they're great for sharing and for very simple editing. But if you want the best results, then shooting RAW is the way to go. ProRAW is very, very different. I'm happy to talk about ProRAW some if you guys like and tell you the differences between those two. But when I'm referring to RAW, I'm mostly referring to proprietary camera RAW. ProRAW is also a very good format for editing, but it's got some limitations. I will mention, though, that not every editor in the world is actually able to handle RAW files correctly. So here's an image that's shot with a Nikon. It's overexposed. And if you take that image and you drop it by one stop as a raw image in my applications, you can see you get a bunch of detail that comes back. All this background and all this stuff is now visible. But if you make that exact same change in photos, it is actually not, it used to, but it no longer handles raw images properly. And so when you do that, you get a gray image. So it's not able to pull detail back anymore. It's a bug in their code, but they have not fixed it. I've talked to them about it, but no changes yet. Let me just see. Is there any questions right now before I jump into this next section?
No, not just yet.
Okay, great. Let me talk briefly about non-destructive editing because at the core, Nitro is a non-destructive editor. And what that means is when you're editing an image, if you edit an image in something like Preview and you crop it or you resize it or whatever, it's going to rewrite your JPEG. It's going to modify that image. Sometimes if you've noticed, if you take a certain files and you try to edit them in Preview, it will say, oh, you can't edit this file. I'm going to make a duplicate for you. Preview is always going to modify a JPEG or a PNG or TIFF. It cannot actually modify RAWs. So in the case of non-destructive editing, the original is never modified. The application stores editing instructions. So for example, change the white balance to this, or drop the exposure, or add a vignette. And it stores that series of editing instructions into the photo library, or if you're not using the photo library, into an XMP file. And it also makes a full-size JPEG. So because your original is never modified, you can revert to original at any time. You can also see your original without reverting. If you edit with more than one app, you can also do that. And again, your original is not modified. But when that happens, the second application is editing that full-size JPEG created by the first app. So you can't edit with two editors and both be dealing with raw data or the original data. You have an editor, you make some changes, then you get a JPEG out of that, and then the next application will be working with the JPEG and on and on and on. So chaining editors is possible, but the quality and the editability starts to decline at every step. Okay, so with that, I will jump into the demo. What I've got here is, so this is, I'm going to show you Nitro on the Mac to start. I also have it running on an iPad and on an iPhone, and depending on time and stuff, I'll show you those things. As I mentioned, Nitro can edit and manage images that are stored in the photo library and in the file system, your choice. So in this case, we're looking at the photo library. And so your whole photo library.
Nick,
Yes.
sorry, but all we're seeing are the words Nitro demo
Oh,
at the moment.
sorry. I did not fix my screen share. Better?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for letting me know. Okay. Um, we have this wonderful bar that's covering everything. Okay. All right. Yes. So sorry about that. As I mentioned, your whole photo library is here. You have actually the ability, if you've noticed in applications, they'll let you either work with the photo library or a limited photo library. You can do both with Nitro, but if you use the whole photo library, then you can do a lot more. There's a lot more control you can get, like ratings and stuff like that require full library access because of the way it works. Um, so your whole photo library is here. You've got library, you've got favorites, all the media types are here, albums, shared albums, everything is present. And as I mentioned, any changes that you make at this stage will immediately go into the photo library. And so you can then see those changes if you go to Photos or any other app that can read and write the photo library. So the application, by the way, also does support a light and a dark mode. So it defaults to dark mode, but if you want to use light mode, that's fine as well. Okay, so one thing you can do, for example, is you can search in here for albums. So I can type, for example, rating, and so you can quickly see the different rating albums. So that's just a quick way to jump around. There's also extensive filtering controls. So you can filter here if you click this little filtering control here. Oops, oh, I'm in the whole bunch of filtering controls by file type, flagging, favorites, edited, export file names, ratings, dates, all bunch of things. And you'll see at the bottom, you can actually save as a smart album. And I'll mention that in a second. One of the simplest things that people like to do is they want to search, for example, for things like their RAW plus JPEG images. And you can see that filters for just RAW plus JPEG. You actually can't do that in the photo library. In Photos, you can only do that in an app like this. But I can also do things like do that and also filter by, 1-star ratings or whatever. And as I increase that, that'll go away. So you can filter. You can look for file names. There's in the corner here, there's actually a file name thing. You can search by file name in the photo library as well. I mentioned the smart albums. So let me open up this section here called Nitro. So when I open that section up, you'll see a whole bunch of new albums appeared. So there are rating albums, for example, and then there's flagging. So you can reject albums and flag them. It'll keep track of images that are edited and ones you've exported. And then you can make smart albums. So as I mentioned, when you're in the filtering interface, you can make any query you want to. So if I'm here, I can basically create whatever I want to of this set here and then save as a smart album, and they appear down here. So for example, if I click on this one, you'll see, RAW plus JPEG images, and those are throughout the entire photo library, and it's searching for just the RAW plus JPEG images. This is a 2-star rating album. So as you rate images, it will put them into these albums. And so this is the set of 2-star images. If I were to make this one of these a 3-star image, it'll disappear and then go to 3-star. One way you can rate an image is you can just tap on the keyboard from 1 to 5. So I'm going to just type the 3 right now, and I'm going to make that a 3-star image. And now that's in the 3-star and it's disappeared from the 2-star. If I undo, it will return a down here because it's sorting by a different filter. So you could rate, you can flag, and again, all those things go into albums, and you can search and filter on them. If you're using the file system, the app does support Finder tags. Speaking of that, you'll see here, this is actually a tab, which is 2 stars. And then over here, I have another tab, which is the file system. So I can make them as windows or as tabs or whatever I want to, but I can have both running at the same time. You can't mix and match the photo library and the file system. They're separate windows because they're separate environments and they have mostly the same features, but let's not confuse those things. So these are different tabs. And I mentioned that there's tagging. So if you go into tags, then these are your Finder tags. So You can tag and see the tags on images as well if you want. So rating and flagging are common between photo library and the file system, and tags are a file system only thing. Yeah, tags are a file system only thing. And then in contrast, smart albums are a photo library only thing. So depending on the where you're storing your images, some features are going to be a little bit different just because binder tags don't make sense in the photo library, for example. Okay, so what's on the left here, you see this thing called My Folders. So these are folders that I have added myself. So Nitro does not access your disk directly. Instead, you give it access. You say, I want to look at this folder or that folder. And that's done, for security purposes. It's best if applications have as little access to data as possible. And Nitro, follows that rule. So you add directories, you can just drag them in from the Finder, or you can, press this plus button and add a folder. That's how that works. Okay. So as I mentioned, it will use XMP files. So if you rate images in the file system, it will store them into an XMP file. And ratings, for example, are things that actually are read by I use the same place that Adobe Lightroom does. So if you rate an image in Nitro, Lightroom can see it, and if you rate an image in Lightroom, then Nitro can see it. So those that interaction is supported. In addition to folders that you have on your disk, you can even use SD cards. You can connect external drives, all that kind of stuff you can use, and just add them to this sidebar here, and then you can rate and edit all you want to, and those changes will be written to XMP files that are stored next to your original file. Okay, I mentioned things. I'm going to move this out of the way. Zoom likes to put all kinds of things on the screen. I can't see what I'm doing. So, for example, I can go here and I can pick this quick filter. You see rating filters, and then flag, not flag, and these are just shortcuts. So this is something that, for example, if you used Aperture, it had kind of this quick way of filtering things, so you can quickly filter by 1 star or better, and so it gives you that thing. These are all the images that have at least 1 star on them. And you can double click to go to a larger image. Let me clear that just to you can see everything. So if you double click, I can double click, for example, on, and these little circles here, by the way, are Finder tags. Okay, so you see my friend the moose here. This is what I call the viewer, or a one-up view. You're seeing one image at a time. And if you want to look at metadata, there's a whole series of controls here on the right. Over here are ratings and zooming controls. So you can press these to zoom in and out. You can rate and see the rating and flag. You can also drive a lot of the application from the keyboard. So if instead of using the plus button here, you can use, for example, Command plus or the Z key, or whatever, to jump in and out. On the right here, there's editing, metadata, a thing called info tiles, EXIF tool, and then these are multi-up modes. So let me start with the info. So you can see here you get metadata. So this is shot information, the file format, the flag, the rating, all the information about the file itself, and then metadata read from the file. And then if you go into, let me see here, if you look at EXIF tool here, so it integrates with the EXIF tool program. So this is pulling all the data from EXIF tool itself. These little hearts here are letting you specify some favorites. So if there are specific pieces of metadata for your camera that you want to read that aren't part of the default set, you can heart them here. So let me just click the heart, and you'll see these are just some ones that I have marked as hearts. I can also search and just say, look for something like, auto, and it'll start finding those things with the word auto somewhere in them, or white balance, white. So you get access to the very detailed EXIF tool stuff, and this more reduced custom view, or not custom, but very special view that shows you the most commonly used pieces of metadata. I mentioned zooming. So, you can zoom in and it remembers your zoom as you go from image to image. So as I go from image to image, then it's going to keep this view. You can see how it's keeping the view, the zoom level around as I go. So you can have a view and you can jump from image to image and keep that same zoom level. There's also an N up feature. So this is a single image up. If I go to this N up feature, then it lets me show multiple images at once in the viewer. So for example, I can pick a series of images here and keep going if I really want to. Why not, right? So I can see multiple images up, and when I zoom them, it'll actually let me pan and zoom synchronized all these images simultaneously. Now, some of them may end up not being centered, so I can turn off this synchronized pan checkbox and just zoom some images, click it back on, and then zoom them again. So on the Mac, you can zoom up to you can view up to 16 images up. And on iPads, this also works. You can zoom up to 4 images. What's nice also is we're seeing the EXIF, we're seeing the info view here for one image at a time. As I go from image to image, then this will change. You'll see like the flag come and go or whatever as I go from image to image. But it'd be nice to see the metadata of all these images simultaneously. To do that, you can pick this button here, and it will show you this flip, which shows me the metadata from multiple images at once. And in fact, let me decrease the number of images here for a second. So I can also search, and as I search for things, then all of them will search simultaneously. If you're not in one up, or not in an up, and you just have one image, then you get a full size view. But N up with the flip is a great way to see the metadata from multiple images at the same time. Okay. Let me get into editing now. So I'll start with just talking about camera support really quickly. I mentioned the thing about how Apple has not been adding camera support quickly. In fact, I believe that generally speaking, they've been adding cameras from when the new OS version, like when they went to Sonoma, they added a bunch of cameras. But it's gotten so bad now that when they went from Sonoma to Sequoia, they added no cameras. So there's been no change in camera support for some time now, and it's getting somewhat critical, which is why it's so important that I've been able to add support on my own. Okay, so I'll give you an example. So this image right here is from an Olympus camera, which Apple does support the camera, but it has certain high resolution modes, and those modes are not supported. So this, for example, is an image that's actually, if you can see this, 80 megapixels. So this is a Olympus EM5 Mark III, which is, I think, a 20 megapixel camera. But in this high-res mode, you can shoot 80 megapixels. And so this image can be viewed and edited in Nitro, but not in pretty much any other app or no other app that uses Apple's decoder. So this is, unique. Another example is this one. This is a GoPro image. And so GoPro images are also natively supported by Nitro, but not by Photos at all. In fact, the support of GoPro is so poor, Photos doesn't even think it's a photograph. So it won't even let you add it to the library. It thinks it's nothing. So there's support for those. And I mentioned also compressed Fujifilm images and the new Nikon HE format. Those are all supported as well. So if you have Nitro, you generally don't have to worry as much about what happens if you get a new camera, because support will be coming from me this way. All right, let me go back here and start with editing. Put this image here. Okay, so I mentioned that Nitro has extensive editing tools, and you get to them with this first button here. So you'll see at the top here, this is some of the same information that you were seeing in the info area, which you hide and collapse into a smaller or larger version of it. Then you have a histogram, which I'll get into more a little bit later. and then these four categories of tools. So there's what are called quick fixes, and then there's presets, sliders, and masking. So we'll start with auto enhance, which is a quick way of improving your image. So you can have it add white balance. There's both a level and a curve adjustment. You can choose whether using levels or curves. So I'm just going to hit the auto enhance button here. And you can see that I have an intensity slider, which lets me kind of dial it up and down depending on what my preference is for the adjustment. And what this does is it actually sets a whole bunch of sliders behind the scenes, which you don't have to do. This is an undo, and then this last one with the two overlapping rectangles is the show original. So you can click and see it before and after. You can also click and hold on the image, or if you're used to something like Aperture, you can use the M key to show the original before and after. Okay. I mentioned with raw images, that one thing that it lets you do is recover detail in overexposed areas. So this is an image that has a lot of very, very bright areas here in the sky. If you look at the histogram here on the right, you can see how there's a big spike here on the right. So in a histogram, the left side represents dark or black pixels, and the right side are brighter pixels up to white. When you see a spike like this, that tells you that you probably have data that is so bright that it isn't really even visible. The detail is not visible on screen. Nitro has something called a clipping indicator. You see these circles here, and these indicate for you when you have overexposed data. So if I click on this right here, this shows you all this area. The pixels are brighter than white, because raw images can store information that's brighter than the white you see on screen. This is data which you can actually edit and work with, but you can't necessarily see those differences on screen because the screen is limited to just plain old white. And if you can see down here, there's little areas of blue. And those blue areas indicate that it's actually a black pixel. So they're called clipping indicators because the pixel information is clipped. There's more information that is there, but you can't see it. And if you were to make a JPEG out of it, you would lose the extra information. The circles next to it are a per channel. So this tells you what's clipped in red or green or blue. So those are per channel. Those are less frequently used, but they can still be valuable. Now, recovering highlights, there's different ways of doing that, and each app has its own way of doing it. What I chose to do in Nitro is to add a tool which makes it easy to do because it will, again, take care of doing a bunch of work for you. So you kind of just decide how much you want to recover, and it will move a bunch of sliders underneath to give you the results. So I'm going to drag this highlight slider, and you can see the clouds come back right away. See how the clouds are coming back, and look at the histogram and how the histogram is now moving as well, right? So it's very easy with Nitro to bring back those details. If I pick the clipping indicator, you can also see how that's doing in terms of bringing back detail in those clouds. I can then also boost midtones a little bit and also get a little brightness back. Now, I may or may not be done with the image, but I've done a whole lot already. Again, I press the M key or whatever, and you can see the difference between before and after. The image itself is a little bit darker, and I can work on that with other tools in the app, but at least I brought back all that detail in the clouds and some in the water. Okay. Next thing, which is we're staying in this first quick fix area, is cloning. And so cloning is a great way to copy pixels from one place to another. And that's really good for cleaning up certain types of problems in an image. In this case, let's say I want to get rid of the stems here that are sticking out of the side. So what I can do is I can click on clone, and you can see all this information here. I can click on the source point where I want the source point to be, and then I can dial up the size of a brush, the strength and the softness, or whatever I want, and start removing things. So I pick a source point. I'm going to pick something that's black area here. And then I can just paint. And then you can see here, I can fairly easily here. If I want to go more carefully, I could, but I can just quickly get rid of that. There's this little thing down here, get rid of that. There. So with cloning, I can easily just fix images. And so for areas where um, this is an example of that, sometimes in like areas with a lot of detail, copying pixels is better than trying to do some sort of retouch or heal, which often will blur images. So that's the clone. Next up, so let's talk about presets and LUTs. So that's the second category here. So presets, like in other applications, are a group of adjustments. The application ships with a whole bunch of them. So there's built-in presets here. So, there's things like tone, fix overexposed raws one, or hold highlights. There's stuff related to curves. There's a bunch of black and whites, things like that. And then you can make your own presets and organize them into subfolders and all kinds of stuff. So there's this one here, which is just, some one I just threw together. So you can add as many presets as you want to. You can save them, and you can manage them. There's a special feature of Nitro called a camera preset, which is a very advanced feature, but it lets you basically say you've got a camera and the way Apple's decode, it's just not quite to your liking. Maybe it's overly saturated, or there's something else about it that you don't like its appearance. What you could do is you could make a preset, edit a sample image the way you wanted it to fix those issues you're unhappy with. And then when you save the preset, you can save it as a camera preset. I not edit this image. Come on. And you can say save as camera preset. And what that does is it will then, every time you open an image from that camera, it'll automatically apply those edits to it. So it's a great way to develop your own look or to adjust how the images are being decoded by Apple's RAW. There's also LUTs. LUT is short for lookup table. And those are done when people, they're done, for example, with film to have a specific look for film. And so LUTs are also, there's a whole bunch that ship with the application. I've got some on, vintage or instant photo or, things like that. You've seen these kinds of looks in the past. I also have film simulations. So I've gone through and created LUTs, which are attempting to match the kinds of film simulations that Fujifilm cameras come with. So, classic chrome and, Velvia and stuff like that are ones that Fujifilm makes for their cameras. But you can only normally use those film simulations with Fujifilm cameras, but my LUTs are available for any camera you want. So that's a nice way to get those kind of looks. They're not identical to the Fujifilm ones because they don't document how they work, but I tried to make them similar. Okay, then we'll move on to the standard sliders. I'll go to the next image here. So now these are kind of things you've certainly seen before in other applications. There's a whole bunch of adjustments. You can open and close them. So white balance, crop, tone, enhancement, levels, all kinds of stuff here. Raw tuning is a special thing, which is giving you some of those controls into Apple's decoder that I mentioned. No other app does a better job with that than this one. These are very, very specialized ones, but customers tell me that this is really important for them to be able to get the look that they want. So there's 16 of these, actually 17 of these, including vignettes and advanced things like channel mixers and perspective and all manner of things, split toning, a black and white tool. I'm going to mention one here, which is HSL. So HSL is hue, saturation, and luminance. It lets you work with individual colors. So, for example, if I want to work on this blue sky, well, there's a couple ways I could do that, right? For example, I could use, something like vibrancy, right? But that's going to affect the whole image, or saturation. These are simple ways of doing it, and they work well at times. I've got other ones that will manipulate the whole image. Another way to do it is to use HSL, which will work in just specific colors. So I can target a color, or if I happen to know, like this is basically a sky color here, then I can use that and I can saturate just the blue. And if you see, only the sky is changing here. The only thing that's going to change is the blue. Or I can use luminance. Sometimes that produces a nicer look or a combination of the two. So that's how I might modify the sky, the blue sky, without touching any of the stuff below. Because if were I to saturate the sky, then these rocks would start to turn kind of a weird orange that I might not find appealing. I can also pick with this target control here on the right, I can pick any hue I want to, and then it will figure out which of these standard hues here, and it will work and basically operate by changing the two hues the right percentage to do what I want. So for example, say I do want to make this orange more saturated. I click on saturation here. I just click on the image, and then you can see how that orange is changing now all of a sudden, right? So that's how I can work on colors, by just picking the hue itself, and then I can manipulate that without changing the sky, or work on the sky without changing the rocks. Okay. And I mentioned split toning. Split toning is a way of tinting highlights or the shadows, or working on the luminance. So that's another advanced tool, but a really nice one for getting specific looks, especially people like to tint the highlights and shadows to get a certain feel to the images. I mentioned a little earlier about the raw decoder and why having access to the raw decoder is so important. This is a terrible looking image. And I can try to boost the exposure on it, and I can do that, but it's still a terrible image. But one of the things about it is that I can't seem to get the black to go away. Even though I've moved this 3 stops, I mean, that's a crazy amount of brightness to add, and it's still too dark. And I'll show you why. If you look again at that histogram, I mentioned that the left side represents black or dark areas. And normally, if you're going to move exposure, those should start to get brighter. But you'll notice they're not. See how that left edge isn't moving? It's just staying right there. And that's because exposure does not change black, hard black pixels. You can see that's all black. So it won't move those. It's going to leave them at black. So you're kind of in trouble. Now you can do things like maybe there's like shadows or other kind of adjustments, but if you push them too hard, they tend to be a little unnatural. So this is where access to the raw decoder is so important. I'm going to move something called blacks. And what the black does is it moves something in a raw file called a black point. And that is a special piece of information stored in the raw file that tells the decoder what black should mean, what color is black really. And I can change that. Something you can do in a RAW, but not in a JPEG. So now if you watch this thing here, I'm going to move it just a lot. You can kind of see how I can pull that whole thing right away, right? Unlike the exposure slider, I can manipulate that. Well, we don't want to move it that far. We just want to kind of inch it away a little bit so that now when we move exposure, now it's going to work on the image much more effectively than it did before, when it was basically pinned to the left edge. Now, I probably wouldn't want to move it that much, but I might move this a little bit here, and then maybe move a little bit with shadows, or, what have you, to get the image to look the way I want to. I probably would want to add a little bit more, color or whatever. I'm not trying to do a great job, but I'm trying to demonstrate how now you can get the detail back in those rocks that you weren't going to get before, because it's able to instruct the raw decoder to process the image differently. Speaking of the decoder, this is a ProRAW image. I mentioned ProRAW a little bit, and ProRAW images are very different from regular RAW, despite the name. I don't want to get into too much detail, but the first thing to know about them is they're not actually RAW, despite the name. They're a different type of file, and they're a DNG, but they're not a RAW DNG. They're a non-RAW DNG. What Apple provides is something called tone mapping. And what tone mapping does is it's basically trying to balance the bright areas and the dark areas to give a more evenly exposed image. And that usually does a pretty good job, sometimes not as good a job. And this is an example of that. So um, if you look at the histogram again, you'll see there's very little on the left and there's very little on the right. What that tells you is this image does not have very much contrast. Contrast is basically you want to have something in black and something in white for your eye to latch onto, and that generally produces a more pleasing image. When images lack contrast, they tend to look a little washed out. And that's actually because of tone mapping. So the tone map is part of the Apple decoder, and Nitro lets you actually turn that up and down. So its default is to be on. I can turn all the way down, and I'm not suggesting this is the right thing to do, but it shows you the difference. So this is what the image looked like when it was captured. So you can see how much brighter this top part is and how dark the sand is. So when Apple's decoder or the camera was manipulating it, they decided to bring back more brightness in the sand and then give a little bit more color back in the sky. So this is what tone mapping is doing. And it's not necessarily doing a bad job, but it's actually hampering our ability to get the right kind of image because it's done too much. So now we've lost all the contrast. So what you can do here is you can turn that down a little bit, get a little bit back in here, and then maybe do something simple like just use something like auto levels. And so now you still have color in here, but now we've got like all the color here in the sky and everything else. So very quickly, we can use tone mapping plus some of the other adjustments to make a ProRAW file look, at least have better contrast, at least look a little better. Okay. I'll move on to the last section of editing, which is masking. Nitro has extensive tools for masking, which lets you work on pieces of the image, different sections of the image. And so, for example, you can brush, you can have gradients, and you can make AI masks. So, for example, I can make a mask of this horse. And so I can name the masks, and then it generates a mask of just the horse. And now I can do whatever I want to the horse itself, and it'll just change that area. So just to demonstrate, I, for example, can make it lighter or darker, for example. But what I might do is maybe adjust the look of the horse a little bit, or I might want to do the opposite. I might want to make actually work on the background and leave the horse alone. I can do that a couple of different ways. What I'm going to do is I can just, for example, invert the mask. And now I'm working on just the background. So I can do, for example, what I might do is use midtones and, may want to bring that down. And so I can bring the background down really easily and not affect the horse. So using this AI masking technology can let you isolate the subject or the background and then work on that really, really quickly. Another image here can show what you can do with brushing. Let's say I want to work on the sky or maybe this area with the rider. It's going to be very hard to paint that. Like the AI subject mask, I'll show you what the AI subject mask will do. So if I make the subject mask, then it'll find the rider. It does a good job with that. But if I want the rider in the grass, I'm going to have to brush that area. And that's going to be difficult to do because there's just a lot of detail here. What Nitro has is it has something called edge-aware masking. So I'll go back to that brush mask I made there. And so if I'm just going to mask and I want to paint and I want the sky, you can see this is going to be difficult. So I'm going to have a really tiny brush and kind of go through these different areas. Instead with Nitro, you can turn on this edge control right here. And now I can just paint right across, right through, and it will just skip these other things. And then when I get to when I'm through with that, then I just copy it. So really, really fast, I can now mask that area. And, just for demonstration, I can manipulate that. Or as I showed before, we could actually just do that and invert that and access the rider. And then maybe, again, I'll do something with, maybe desaturate a little bit or midtones and, make it look a little different. And so now I can very easily work with different parts of the image by combinations of brushing, or AI masking and edge-aware brushing to get just the right area. So Nitro lets you work on the whole image, images by color and hue, or by area using masking. And the last thing I'll show is in editing is the vignette. So I'll leave masking and go here. So Nitro is a special type of vignette. You can see that right there. Let's make it overly strong so you demonstrate what's going on. The difference between its vignette and everybody else's is it lets you change where the vignette is located. So for example, I can move it down to focus on the rider. And I'll turn this down a little bit so it doesn't need to be that severe. But there, I can get vignettes that now are positioned exactly where I want them to be. And often you're not going to, you usually don't want your subject to be dead center. So having a vignette that you can move around is really helpful. Okay, let's see. And then let's get to, if you click once, it'll show it full screen. Export, it's got a lot of export controls. You can export a new image to your Mac, as you might expect. You can save a new image into the photo library if you're in the file system, or if you're in the photo library, you can save images to the photo library or to your Mac. So you can go between the two sides of the two worlds really easily. And in fact, there's this one, copy original and rating. So you can edit an image that you store in the file system, rate it, edit it, do whatever, and then you can copy that information to the photo library. What it copies is the original image, the editing information, the rating information. And then once you have in the photo library, it's not a JPEG, it's the original image with all of that non-destructive rating information. So you can go and continue editing if you want to. So you can do the same thing the other way. If you're in the photo library, you can copy an original plus ratings and adjustment data to the file system. So it lets you move images between the two worlds with all of the data included. If you're just exporting a new image, then you have access to all the usual list of suspects, things like file formats, compression, color profile, sizes. You can control what kind of metadata you want to include. You can set up watermarks. So you can have watermarking with text or images. You can position them. You can move them around, all kinds of stuff. And the last thing you do on the Mac is you can also open a program when you're done. So you can open up, say, you want to open up Photoshop or something. So you can export a bunch of images, and when you're done, you can then launch something else. If you're using the file system on the Mac, also, there's an edit with external app, which lets you actually launch another application, and it will send that file to the other application of editing. So it integrates with existing applications you're using. Okay, so I was going to jump to iPads or iPhones, but I can stop for a minute.
Yep. Nick,
people have thoughts or questions?
A couple of questions in chat. Chris Frank, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Oh dear, I'm in the middle of eating. Yeah.
Well, I can read it here. When I use time-lapse setting on my iPhone, it plays the final video back too fast. So Nitro does not have abilities to work with video right now. So unfortunately, no, I can't help you with that. People have been asking for video editing, and it's a possibility. It's a lot of work, so it's on the list to do. But there's some other ones I want to get to first. So it's not a near-term thing.
Okay, supplementary question though. You were just saying all the other photo editors that you can connect to. What about Capture One Pro? I didn't see whether that was there or not.
I don't have it installed. So these are it only lists programs that are installed on your computer.
I see.
And so what it does is because I don't know all the apps in the world. So what I do is I just ask Mac OS and I say, what applications can open or edit images, basically.
Got it. Okay.
And so they give me a list back.
Thanks very much.
And Charles,
here.
Yes. Charles, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. Hello, Nick. I have a rather large archive of slide film, Kodachrome 64. by any miracle, can Nitro improve slide film imagery, Kodachrome work?
Well, you scan them in, right, at this point?
Yes.
So yeah, so I mean, at the point that they're images, of course, you can work with them here. Well, there's a couple of things. For example, I mean, some people they want to use Nitro to convert from negative to positive, and it's actually got a preset specifically for that. So so if you have them as negatives, you can actually, if you did a negative scan or something, there actually is a preset that actually will reverse the the negative to the positive. If you want to do things like clean up some scratches and things like that, it's got a fairly simple spot and line removal tool, which will let you clean up a little bit with that. So you can do that with that as well. One thing that you might want to do is if your film, since Kodachrome 64 has a certain look or characteristic of the way the images come out, you could edit a single image from that you scanned in, and then you could just take a whole bunch of them and apply that preset. So, for example, what you could do is, if I had a preset if I figured out a way to edit those images to make them look the way I want them to look now, I might create a preset and then pick apply preset to all of those, pick the preset, and then hit apply, and it will go and just apply the edits to all those images at once. So probably the best thing to do, if you want to, first of all, you could rate them or flag them to decide which ones you want to keep, not keep. So ratings and flagging. You could edit one image or a set of images and then make a preset and then adjust them all at once. So that's something you could do. And then if you've got the ones you want to keep and you want to put them in your iCloud photo library, you could then export them all to photos. That might work.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. How are we doing for time, by the way?
Oh, it's 23 minutes past. Oh, we've got ages. 20, 35 minutes.
Ages? Okay.
Can I just throw a dumb question at you? I just noticed that the levels adjustment in your adjustments panel.
Let me get that.
Looked somewhat different to anything that I've seen before. What's going on there?
Levels. Okay. So it looks different. Okay. So there's a bunch of things. So there's levels is a pretty easy to use adjustment compared to curves, say. It's got some things in mind that are different from some others. So this is fairly typical, which is you could pick different channels that you're looking at. So that's standard. These are samplers. So this lets me pick the white point. So let me find maybe a better image for this. I'm not sure I have one super handy, but so I can pick the white and the black points to set. Yep, that was obviously the black point. Let's try the white point. Okay, whatever I'm sampling is not the right thing to sample. But so you can set the black and the white point. You can also just move this. I'm on the red channel, so I should be on the red channel. So you can adjust these things here. So this is black. This is white. This is the midpoint. You can specify either the input or the output, basically, which is what the top versus the bottom.
I see.
Okay, so this is very similar. If you think about a curve, instead of just being the output, you have the outputs and the inputs, and so you can move those. So sometimes a curve will just have these three bottom sliders, but this lets you manipulate both directions. This is actually really interesting too. This tells it how to process gray. So you can process it either with luminance or with equal RGB. And curves and levels in almost all applications treat the gray channel as equal, as like plain old gray. And what that can actually do is cause color shifts to occur and tinting to occur. If you switch this to luminance, you'll actually get generally a nicer looking image because it will treat them more the way people's eyes work as opposed to the way computers work with numbers.
Yeah.
So That's luminous versus RGB. And curves has the same control. You can switch between luminous and RGB. And curves actually lets you run a curve that's either gamma corrected, which is what most curves in the world operate run, and linear. Curves also has a hyper advanced feature called extended curves, extended range curves, which lets you, this is not a good choice for it because it's a pro raw, but maybe this, maybe this one. Curves here. And so it actually lets me see extended histogram information. So this is, as we mentioned, this is a very bright image. And so I can actually manipulate the curve beyond 1.0. So this is a, triple advanced feature, but it's unique to this application. Aperture had also had an extended range curve, which I actually did. That's why I know how to do this one. And so it's similar conceptually to that one.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. So let me jump to the iPad. Oh, I see another question here from Ward Clark. The Mac App Store shows prices as get plus in-app purchases. Yes, I will explain that in just in a minute. How the pricing works. I will explain that in a minute. Okay. So we are now looking at my iPad. So I mentioned that Nitro runs on iPhones, iPads, and Macs. And the feature set is very similar. Whenever possible, I make them the same across all these platforms. So you can see, for example, at the bottom here, there's a control to go between files and photos. So if I go to photos, then this is the photo library. You can see again, all photos and the Nitro albums and all this kind of stuff. So you get access to your photo library on the iPad, and you can also use files.app. So these are images stored on my iPad in the Files app, or you can use an SD card, or you can use an external driver or whatever. So all the features are the same. The editing tools are all the same. Things we did before, like, we've got this image here, and you can, all the adjustments, everything is as you might have, as you saw before. So it's nice and fast as well. You can, I mentioned rating. So this has 4 stars, if you can see that. I can change the rating with the keyboard, or I can actually use gestures and rate the image and flag it by touching the screen here. So there's ratings, there's flagging, all the smart album stuff works. So if I make a smart album on my Mac and on my iPad is over iCloud, it will see the same smart album. Those things work as well. I'll jump from here to this folder here. I mentioned that you can do N-up on iPads, and so I'll show you that. So we can do N-up here, and we can zoom. These are 42 megapixel Sony RAWs, so you can just kind of fly around with those. And the info flip thing works as well here. Obviously, with a smaller screen, it's harder to get all the detail, but if you have fewer images, then you can still see all the metadata. This is an iPhone. It's an old one. I use that because I don't want to have the latest, greatest. I like to have a range of hardware. So this is same kind of stuff. So you get the same control. You got access to the photo library and to the file system. Here's some images I put on here for the iPhone. So I can pick one right here. Now, of course, because of the limited size of the screen, controls move around. So rating, for example, is down here at the bottom with flagging. Info is down here with help and share and trash. So I can hit the info, and I use that same flip behavior to let me get access to the metadata. And then when you go into edit, the interface is different as well. So the controls now move to the bottom of the screen. So you saw auto enhance, those things are there before. Even the masking controls, everything is here on the iPhone as well. I can, scroll through here and pick, whatever, if I want to break black and white. I can manipulate all those things with a iPhone specific interface. This bar above the word black and white here, this is undo and redo. There's show original, copy and paste of adjustments, and a histogram. So the histogram is an on-screen floating histogram that you can move around. It's turn off the black and white. And so I can manipulate that. I can, show hot pixels. There aren't any in this image, but so I've got the histogram that floats. There's a neat trick I can do. So I'll go to a different adjustment here real quick. So as I move this slider, you can see the histogram is moving too, right? But because it's on the screen or on top of the image, that can be a little annoying because it's in the way of what you're trying to adjust. So you can move out of the way, or you can use these histogram options. So I can pick one here that says show, which means always turn it on. I can also pick only while adjusting. So when I do that, then it stays on while I'm moving it, but then it disappears. So it's gone unless I start adjusting. So what I'm showing is the ability for the histogram to come and go intelligently. So you can have it appear only while you're adjusting, or I can have it only appear while you're not adjusting, which is to say, it's not appearing now while I'm watching, and then when I let go, it appears. So it's a great way to have a control that's on screen, but gets out of your way when you want to be out of your way. And then I'll show one other thing, which is curves. So curves being a large control shrinks the area that you're working on, especially with a phone, which is, this is a pretty low resolution phone. But I have so you can see the small curve down here. Okay, I can manipulate this. Or I can have this button that says the word large right here. And now you've got a curve that's on top of the image. So that's nice too. So you can work on top of the image and get a larger curve or a small one that fits inside the area that you're working with. Yeah. Okay. That is what I have today. Let me jump back to slides and I'll cover some of those questions that I've got here. Okay, so to answer the question from before, so Nitro, I sell Nitro differently from other people. So if you get apps today, almost every app comes as a free trial with strings attached. Those strings being you have to sign up for a subscription and, oops, you forgot to cancel your subscription. I hate that. I hate that as a customer. So I didn't do it, which I'm sure costs me a whole bunch of revenue. That's okay. Instead, I have a completely free 7-day trial. So what you do is you download the app, and that's free to download. And then it'll bring up an initial dialog to start the trial. And when you do that, it will prompt you, and it has to, this is an Apple rule. It'll ask you to purchase something for $0, £0, £0, whatever. And that's how Apple keeps track of the fact you bought the trial. And then you can use the app, everything's unlocked for 7 days. After that 7-day period, then you can do one of a few things. You can keep using the application, but it turns off features. So you can still export, you can still view images, you can't edit, and there's a bunch of things that are turned off. Or you can purchase something, you can subscribe, or you can buy a lifetime option on the application, or you could just delete it. All those things are fine. But when you sign up for the trial, it will not charge you. It will not charge you. There's no surprises. There's nothing to cancel. So it's the trial that I would like as a customer, which is I want to try for 7 days and then I'll decide if I want to use it or if I don't want to use it, and if I want to use it, how. So that brings to the next step, which is the different options. So there's after the trial, There is a monthly subscription, there's an annual one, and then there's a lifetime. The lifetime purchase includes all the updates. There's not going to be like a Nitro 2 where we start all over again. Nitro just goes on forever. As well, whatever forever means. But I'm not going to, when you buy the lifetime option, you get all the updates that I'm going to create for Nitro. And then that's the price for the lifetime. It's a unified purchase. When you buy either on the Mac or on the iPad or on the iPhone, you are entitled to all the other platforms. So it's a single purchase. And then this nitrofphoto.app is the website. And that's it.
Fantastic.
Okay, so let me jump back to some questions here. So I hopefully I answered Ward's question. Can Nitro Photo fix image corruptions, bad file headers? No, it definitely cannot. It uses Apple's code to read the files, and if the file is damaged, then it'll just show an error. So it doesn't have the ability to go in and say, gee, this byte is wrong and let me change it for you. It does not have that feature. Okay, and then Martin Gould, what advantages does Nitro have, and does it seamlessly integrate with it? So it does have some. I think of Nitro as being the Lightroom-like application for people who are in Apple's ecosystem. So if you're using, let me. If you're using Lightroom, you can use Adobe's cloud. But if you're using Apple stuff and Apple Photos and the camera and stuff, there's not a very good connection between the two. I mean, Adobe's added features like automatically import, but now you're copying things around. So Nitro is a very powerful photo application if you're using Apple's technology. If you're using Photos or your Mac and iOS specific. And so that's what it's designed to do. So its biggest differentiator between Lightroom and Nitro is its embracing of the Apple ecosystem. And so does it integrate with Lightroom? It does in small ways. So I mentioned XMP. So if you're using the file system, then Nitro writes into XMP, and it writes in whatever it can that Lightroom will read. So editing adjustments are not interchangeable. And they're not interchangeable because they never are. So when Lightroom writes into XMP that they moved contrast by X amount, they just write contrast 0.3. But they don't tell you what that means. Like, what is Adobe's algorithm for contrast? Well, they don't tell anybody, and they change it over time. And so I have no way of interpreting their information. So that data isn't read back and forth. So you can't edit in Lightroom and then see the edits in Nitro or vice versa. But ratings work, and keywords and stuff like that, those things I'm going to add support for with time too. So there's limited interchange, but as much as practical. Dale, thank you. I'm glad you liked the trial. I thought that was something that's important for me to do, was to have a proper trial. So yeah, so it's the Lightroom for the Apple world. It's just exactly as written there. Can Nitro edit video? Not yet. I mentioned that earlier. People were talking about things like time lapse and stuff like that. So it's something I'd like to add. Right now, it doesn't edit video. Video can be just a whole lot of pictures, but there are some specific things that you'd want to do with the Real Video Editor, which I've not done yet. So it's on the roadmap, but I don't have a date when I can say it would be there.